start recording now. Welcome everyone to the Assembly District 28 Housing Forum, co-hosted by South Bay YIMBY, Santa Cruz YIMBY, and the Student Housing Coalition. We have shared goals and are working to create a more inclusive and sustainable community by advocating for building more housing, better transportation, and protecting renters. Santa Cruz YIMBY and South Bay YIMBY are chapters of YIMBY Action, a network of people who advocate for abundant, affordable housing across the United States. The Student Housing Coalition is a UCSC-based organization that advocates on behalf of students, faculty, and staff. I'm Elizabeth Conlon, a lead with Santa Cruz YIMBY and your moderator for today. If you wish to have a say in the endorsement process or support our mission for a better future, I highly encourage you to become involved and sign up to be a member of YIMBY Action. You can do that with the link in the chat. We are joined by former Santa Cruz County Clerk Gail Pellerin, Los Gatos Mayor Rob Rennie, and Starbucks Union Organizer Joe Thompson. The candidates before you have had an opportunity to see the questions ahead of time. Here's the schedule for the forum. We'll start out by having the candidates introduce themselves, followed by 4 short answer questions for all candidates, 8 rapid fire questions, and finally concluding statements. For candidate introductions, each candidate will have 2 minutes. We'll have Joe go first, followed by Rob, and then Gail. Joe, you may begin.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Sorry for any background noise or anything in the background too. I'm actually up in San Francisco for an organizing project with Starbucks, but enough about that. Again, the main reason why we're here is to talk about housing and the housing insecurity issues that most of us face. As a student, 9% of the student population is homeless at UC Santa Cruz, and that is a travesty that needs to get fixed. And I worked with the Student Housing Coalition along with YIMBY supporters to pass multiple housing projects in the city of Santa Cruz, including 831 Water Street, 130 Center Street, and we've also fought against the criminalization of homelessness as well in the city of Santa Cruz, including recently the oversized vehicle ordinance, the outdoor camping ordinance as well. These are issues that not only bring home very well to me because I've done a lot of volunteer effort with Food Not Bombs in Santa Cruz, and just talking with people, there needs to be a method where if you're down on your luck and you lose your home, you can rebuild yourself. There's one person I was talking to at Food Not Bombs. His name was also Joe, and we connected over that, but we also connected over the fact that there isn't a real social safety net in the United States when it comes to housing, especially in Santa Cruz. And the housing conditions are not only getting worse, but there's a housing crisis that no one talks about. And that's the main reason why we're here to discuss this today. And I think that not only should YIMBY support better housing policies for all candidates, but it should truly endorse someone who has fought alongside YIMBY in this time, and continue to work with a candidate who has always supported YIMBY's projects and will always stand by your side. And even if I don't get your endorsement, I'll still always be there with you, because this is our fight together. And we need affordable housing in Santa Cruz and Santa Clara. Thank you.
Okay, Rob.
All right. Thank you. I'll start off by introducing myself. I'm an engineer of 25 years, and I'm currently retired a few years ago, so I could spend more time basically volunteering in public elected official kinds of ways. I've been a council member in Los Gatos for 8 years. This is my second time as mayor as we rotate through. The reason I'm running and the reason I continue to be on the Los Gatos Council is I'm a problem solver. I enjoy solving tough problems. Our community has a lot of tough problems to solve. Housing obviously being up at the top of the list, also climate change, fire safety and preparedness, homelessness, and a long list. One thing I did want to emphasize is I've been somebody who's been saying yes before the YIMBY organization really got started very far. On our North 40 project in Los Gatos, we had a lot of opposition to building 325 units, with 50 of them being very low income. I voted essentially for that project. I voted against the denial that the council did. We did ultimately deny the project as a council, but I stood up and argued for why it was so important, particularly the affordable housing portion of it. Continuing as a council member now, while so many people are fighting our housing element, I just pulled together a study session for council, planning commission, and our housing element board to understand the nuts and bolts of building affordable housing and how we can actually meet our RHNA below market goals versus fight them like many of the other cities are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Gail?
Hi, my name is Gail Pellerin. I stand for equity, dignity, and integrity for myself and for others. I'm honored to be endorsed by one of your 2021 YIMBY Housing Champions, Assemblymember Robert Rivas, as well as U.S. Senator Alex Padilla, U.S. Representative Jimmy Panetta, and many state and local leaders. We're lucky that the two counties in this district both have local YIMBY organizations, Santa Cruz YIMBY and South Bay YIMBY, that are focused on more affordable housing, transit-oriented housing, and equity in housing, and ensuring renters are protected. I started my career in the California State Assembly. I've spent over a quarter century making sure your vote counts and making sure government is accessible to the people. And now I'm ready to go back to Sacramento to do the important work of solving the enormous challenges faced by our Assembly District 28, covering parts of Santa Clara and Santa Cruz counties. So my 35 years of public service at both local and state levels makes me uniquely qualified to meet these challenges as your state assembly member. For more than 27 years, I served as the chief elections official and was elected 4 times as the Santa Cruz County Clerk. And as Santa Cruz County Clerk, I worked to make voting accessible to everyone. I commissioned a national recognized vote-mobile program, implemented transparent and verifiable audits, and expanded voting hours and locations. I also did Passport Saturdays and opened an office in Watsonville to serve our South County constituents. I care deeply about this district. I'm running for state assembly because I'm dedicated to creating a more sustainable, equitable, and healthier world for my children, hopefully someday my grandchildren, and the people living here in the state of California. I have deep ties to both counties in the districts. One of my first jobs when I got married was working with Touche Manufacturing, which was one of the largest Hispanic-owned businesses in San Jose. My husband, Tom, practiced law in Santa Clara County for several decades and until he passed away in 2018. I believe that democracy can only thrive if elected officials involve the community in solving the problems we face. So I will be looking to all of you for your input on how to address the challenges that we face in this district. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail. And sorry that you guys weren't able to see the speakers to start out, and we're just seeing the clock. Hopefully we have that fixed so you can see people.
I don't see that.
Ryan is the timekeeper, and he's going to start putting the timing in the chat for the panelists so that we can see you and not the timer. Moving on to longer questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer. This round, Gail will go first, followed by Joe, and then Rob. For the first question, the State Department of Housing and Community Development recently released a new statewide housing plan that calls for the development of 2.5 million new homes by the end of the decade, including 1 million affordable homes. Currently, the state is falling woefully short of that goal. At the current rate, fewer than 600,000 units are projected. As a state legislator, what action would you take to help reach this goal?
So we need to be clear what the goal is. There's really no way for California to produce 2.5 million single family detached homes on individual lots. So what we must do is house 2.5 million households on different sizes, compositions, needs, and means. As we approach that task, we need to be open to many different strategies, all the way from co-housing to multi-generational housing to supportive permanent housing. We need to both stimulate the production of housing, but also motivate the behaviors of both the market and the consumers. So the state has policy leverage over land use, construction financing, and long-term affordability. On the land use side, we have SB 9, which allows higher densities in existing housing zones, and SB 10, which streamlines approvals for multi-unit development close to transit and jobs. Those are already law. So at this point, I think we should let those be implemented and put some energy behind enforcement and then evaluate whether changes are going to be needed. We need to be on guard against speculators trying to use the crisis to break into ag zones and protected spaces. And we need to have positive examples of statutory CEQA exemptions, including special purpose housing linked that are built by bona fide nonprofit developers. The construction financing linked to efficient construction, the state can use its general obligation bond power with voter approval to both supply construction financing and meet debt service needs. However, we should put real emphasis on efficient production strategies, such as use of modular components and electrified buildings. Our financing guidelines should also encourage the repurposing of existing buildings. The work from home lesson of the pandemic is that we have huge surplus of what is now office space. And because people are shopping online, we have lots of commercial space that is empty. And I think we need to prioritize those spaces for the conversion to housing. And then on financing support, our land use flexibilities must be tied to permanent affordability requirements. Our land and capital resources cannot be used for just the benefit of a few.
Thank you. Next up, Joe.
Okay, this is a great question because it directly relates to what we're actually going to be proposing as a state legislature. And for me, one of the main issues that I'll be fighting for and have already worked on is SB 886, the Student Housing Crisis Act. This is one of the major bills that I will either co-sponsor and for sure vote for if elected, because it really does get down to one of the root causes of the issue, and it's these CEQA lawsuits that are being used maliciously to hurt students, to hurt single family owners, to hurt the entire community of where they're where the housing project is. I'm a firm believer in CEQA reform. We really do need to take a longer step and look at how can we protect the environment, but not at the expense of making people go homeless. That's a major issue as a state legislature that I'll take action since moving forward. Specifically, I would love to be able to introduce, along with Alex Leah, there's another bill that was introduced for social housing. And I really do think that at the end of the day, we need not only low income affordable housing, but we do need there to be transitional housing for people who have been let down by society over and over again. And when it comes down to it, the state can say that they're going to have 1 million affordable units, but where is that affordability coming from? Is it the affordability to live in Santa Cruz? Is it the affordability to live in Redding? There's different affordability measures that we need to look at, and the best way to do that is not only taking some of the power away from the local level, but making sure you look at the specific cost of living in those areas to make them really affordable. I'm one of the only candidates to actually live in affordable housing in Lincoln, California. My mom lives in a single apartment and spends most of her time there. And we do need more low-income affordable housing across the board. And as a state legislature, I will absolutely fight for that. Thank you.
Thanks. Rob?
Okay, so thank you for the question. I would agree with actually a lot of what I just heard from my colleagues, that there's no way we're going to be able to build all these houses as single family homes, that there's going to be massive effects on our infrastructure. We're not going to be able to keep up. In terms of the affordable housing, that's something I've been thinking about again in Los Gatos, with half of our housing units supposed to be below market. How do we create a plan where those actually get built? The money has to come in from somewhere, or you have to combine them with market rate housing. And usually market rate housing can only support a 20% or so. So you don't get 50% of your housing built that way. So some of my ideas, we've had quite a few bills to assist elected officials in their local control issues, right? To actually get housing projects moving. But I think what's missing is some of the sweeteners also to help in the financing and so forth. So for example, I would put more money in a financing fund. A lot of times, even certainly financing for affordable, but I would also do it for your missing middle workforce housing. Also, a lot of projects aren't penciling out anymore, particularly if you have to build with a podium. But financing can add maybe sometimes 10% to the cost of trying to get a project done. But if you can get low-cost financing from the state instead of other private sources, I think that's a good sweetener. I'm almost out of time already. Another thing I would do is try to remove some of the barriers to the local opposition with sweeteners, such as for every affordable house you bought, you get money to put towards infrastructure, transit, water, and remove a lot of the opposition that you see from local residents.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. Given overcrowding in student housing, an estimated 9% of UCSC students experiencing homelessness, and years of delays for more on-campus housing at UCSC and across the UC and Cal system, do you support SB 886 to exempt from CEQA on-campus student housing, and what else would you do to address these problems? Again, we'll start with Gail.
So yes, I absolutely support that piece of legislation. Santa Cruz continually ranks in the top 10 for the highest cost of living. So our UCSC students face it even more than some of the other regions in California. Our future and the future of many of our disadvantaged communities requires that access to UC and CSU system not be artificially capped. Exempting on-campus rent-restricted housing from full CEQA compliance is a necessary step. However, there must be sustainability tests, especially in terms of water supply adequacy. The university systems must prioritize access to California students and make the most possible use of water and energy-saving technologies. So where compromises must be made, the universities need to show good faith by limiting the out-of-state admissions.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, of course. So I absolutely support this bill. It's one of the bills that I've actually, previously supported and worked on with the Student Housing Coalition. Not only do I support this bill, I support making housing for students at universities free. The main reason why this is I am technically rent burdened. Luckily, without financial aid, I would not be able to go to Santa Cruz because of the housing costs associated with that. And I don't agree with Gail on this issue about capping the amount of out-of-state residents. Because myself, I was actually an out-of-state resident when I went to Santa Cruz. I spent the last 3 years out in Texas and transferred into Santa Cruz from a Texas residency, even though I've lived in California all of my life. So I don't agree with that because, all students bring in ideas and they bring to the game of, what we're all fighting for. And as long as you're pro-housing, I want you in Santa Cruz. And I think that really when it comes down to it, the issues that divide us need to be focused more on policy solutions that work for everyone, not just, other people who, don't face housing insecurity issues. I think that one of the main reasons why I'm so passionate about these housing policies is because I've also recently working on the empty home tax in Santa Cruz, which is yet another policy I support in the city and hope to bring to the state. This empty home tax campaign will not only tax about $3,000 worth of properties in Santa Cruz, but also, it's going to be creating a permanent affordable housing fund for the city to really help students out, but also everyone. And not only will I pledge to make a, empty home tax campaign for the state, but I will continue to fight for all disadvantaged populations because people who own second homes, need to be held accountable. And, it's not really fair to have a second home when some people don't even have one to begin with. And I think that there's a clear distinction between me and some other candidates on that.
Rob?
Thank you. I have to say that I agree with most of what Joe just said. I definitely would support SB 866, I think was the number. I think it's so important to be able for students to be housed. I agree with finding ways for them to be housed for free. It's the best way for less affluent people from less affluent families to be able to be lifted up and build a future for themselves. I think they need to be able to focus on their studies and not worrying about how they're going to afford to live. I don't think there's any way better than give people a leg up to helping themselves. I would also add on the CEQA, I think we need to be going further on the CEQA reform. I would, instead of trying to do, in this case, we're talking about an exemption, but maybe look at sometimes exemptions, but also look into the idea of putting time limits on the lawsuits that often come with CEQA. CEQA is often used for things that aren't environmental. They're really used for, I don't want it in my backyard, basically. And we need to stop those. There still should be discussions about, the environmental impacts. But if you put limits on the courts, for example, 2 months for a lawsuit, right, has to be resolved, then you still get into the important environmental discussions in a lot of cases, but you don't block projects that are so important. And I think I covered all my thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, next question. California has a critical need for more housing at all income levels, but the challenge is greatest for affordable housing. In Santa Clara County, a family can earn $50,000. In Santa Cruz County, that's $41,700 for a family of 4, and still be considered extremely low income. And we all know that there are many with fixed incomes, including seniors and persons with disabilities, earning well below that, struggling to afford rent. What state actions do you think are needed to produce more housing that is affordable to lower income residents, especially those who earn less than 30% of area median income?
So it's another great question. In addition to linking the provision of bond financing to permanent affordability, the fact remains that for a quarter of our residents, market rate affordable housing is out of reach. California needs to set aside a portion of its general fund budget to support housing subsidies. Not just rent subsidies, but assistance will be needed for mortgage payments in targeted circumstances. So this is not necessarily the same as replicating or taking over the federal Section 8 program, which, while that's important, is a blunt one-size-fits-all strategy that operates somewhat like a lottery. Winning is nice, but not many people do. As an example, over the past decade, California has significantly reduced the family homeless because of the state invested in CalWorks housing support program that provided tailored, sometimes limited subsidies to families as they engaged in skills building and employment training opportunities and activities. So these kinds of subsidies strictly tied to reasonable rents and eviction protections can be scaled and operated in state and local government partnerships. So the state must leverage the state must also look at leveraging the immense Medi-Cal program to fund these kinds of supportive services that will help households to maintain stable housing. And I intend to support the full implementation of the CalAIM initiatives that expand our health financing system to cover social detriments of health. Thank you.
Thanks. Joe?
Yeah, this is another great question that hits home personally. So my family, we've actually never, owned a home. We've always been renters. So I firmly believe that not only do we need to be investing in, getting rid of this rent burden that faces a lot of Californians, but truly investing in home ownership programs for all Californians. There's been a lot of not only racial discrimination with redlining in California, but there's been a lot of home ownership loan denial because of people facing low income and not being able to find interest loans that will work for them in the long run. And this issue really does hit home because I've had to deal with this with my family, and we're very low income. And when it comes down to it, I think the best way to really address this issue not only includes fighting specifically for like SB 886 and social housing for low income people, transitional housing for homeless populations as well, but really thinking about housing in a different way. Same way I kind of view healthcare. Healthcare should not be run by a for-profit industry. We know this. That's why a lot of people support Medicare for all. And I truly believe the same thing for housing. Each person should be allowed to own a home. It's not, I think housing is a human right, because when you think about like the land we, sit on isn't our land, it's stolen land when it comes down to it. And, at the end of the day, nobody owns this land. It's our land as Americans. And fighting for housing for all means making sure that everyone has a home, it's affordable, it's decent. And, that's really the clear difference between me and my opponents, is housing is really a human right for me, and it hits home personally.
Thank you. Rob?
Thank you for the question. I have to apologize. I actually didn't really study the questions ahead of time, so I kind of already answered this one with my ideas about from the state, more financing available, more sweeteners to make it easier to remove roadblocks so we actually build more. So I'll add a couple other things. One thing I would emphasize to help open up housing, and there is some trickle down effect, and it's difficult to get that very low or extremely low, I think you said, housing available. But one idea that I think we should promote is this work from home idea. As more people are able to work from home, they're able to move further away from the job centers, and that's going to open up a lot more homes close by for the lower income workers as it can filter down. But the big solution really has to be more production. And when we're talking about the extremely low, we're also really talking about those people that are close to being homeless or just coming out of homeless. And I think it was mentioned earlier, this idea of transitional housing rather than the more expensive sort of permanent housing. We've got so many people that don't have housing at all, or in danger of losing the housing we have. So I really think we need to put a focus on increasing our production of transitional housing so that these people can stay housed, be able to hold down a job and be able to function. I mean, you can imagine how difficult it is if you don't have a safe place to sleep and clean up to be actually able to be housed or to keep on a job, sorry. And then the other portion of it is making sure if somebody is about to become homeless, that there's rapid rehousing. Again, don't let them even start down this spiral. I think my time's up. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. The next question. More attention has been focused recently on recognizing and addressing historical and ongoing systemic racism throughout our society. In housing, we see the harmful effects of past and current policies, including segregation, limited housing choices, and lack of opportunity, all disproportionately impacting people of color. As a legislator, how would you reform California's housing policies in order to dismantle segregation, center racial equity, and close the racial wealth gap?
Okay, great question. I believe one underlying principle that needs to guide our housing policies is that of equity. So state interventions can occur in a way that reinforces the existing market prejudice against communities of color, or in a way that treats all communities equally as though their circumstances and starting places are the same, or in a way that recognizes historical and continuing disparities that consciously seeks to correct them. So the issue, how we deploy the immense resources of California in a way that is sensitive to a history of oppression that, while rooted centuries ago, rears its ugly head daily. Our housing crisis affects many, but not all in the same way. In the existing housing model, you get an apartment or you get a mortgage or even a return call based on metrics that are overwhelmingly benefit some and disadvantage others. So we may not be able to change the behavior of the whole market, but we can certainly use our financing and regulatory authority to change a large part of that. Our financing support must be conditioned on developers and operators adopting rental and sales policies that embrace and advantage the people who have historically been excluded. Our financing strategy must emphasize supportive developments that offer historically excluded groups ownership opportunities, with the recognition that those developments will require deeper subsidies. And basically that's the entry price for equity. So thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
This is another issue that I think needs to be addressed, especially at the statewide level. And even in one of my classes, we were talking about how do we really get down to fixing these housing inequality issues. And one of the things that I learned about and now support is reparations for the segregation and housing policies of the past. And the main reason why is because it's very clear that you can draw the lines. You can see the redlining that happened in the past, and you can see that not only is gentrification causing displacement and hurting some of our communities, but we need to reevaluate the way we look at housing inequality in the United States. Another thing that I will fight for at the statewide level is specifically prioritizing BIPOC individuals so they can not only receive further housing solutions, but truly have the ability to get a leg up on from their past historical racism that has been associated with housing policies in the United States. And by continuing allowing, to let people down because of that historical racism, not only shows that we need to continually fight against the structural racism that even still exists in housing in Santa Cruz. Over the last 10 years, it has got more segregated, and you can see on racial dot plot maps that I've worked with Student Housing Coalition over. You can see the city getting more whites, and you can see the concentration of low-income folks, specifically Hispanic people like myself, in certain areas in the city. And we need to not only address the segregation that is very blunt and clear in the past, we also need to address it that's happening now. And it's because there is a lack of affordable housing in Santa Cruz. So not only will I continue to fight against that discrimination, segregation, and inequality in Santa Cruz and at the statewide level, but I will fight to close the racial gap and make sure that each family, no matter what, has access to an affordable home and a decent living. Thank you.
Thanks. And Rob?
So it's always hard to improve upon what my colleagues say. I would start off by saying, well, I think the most important thing I do would be listen to different community members from all kinds of backgrounds to shape my views and policies, knowing that I'm not from those red lines affected communities, and so I would really need to understand much better, how do we create effective policies for them. I was thinking, that we talked about equity of across all races and ethnic backgrounds and so forth, and I'm thinking, because there's been so many years of this redlining and certain ethnic groups have not been able to build the wealth that helps. If you're somewhat wealthy, you can make sure your kids get educated or have more time to help them get educated, and then they can do better, right? So even if you're not passing a house on, the wealth that is built up and helps you educate your kids helps to bring them up. And so instead of just equity, actually Joe used the term reparations. I sort of like that term because we need to go beyond than just being equal. We need to help them catch up. And one thing we do in Los Gatos is we have a below market requirement when you build some number of homes, and we require it to be mixed in with the market rate one, so that there isn't this segregation that starts to occur as we build affordable housing. It shouldn't be like a project. I mean, you think about the projects in New York City, right? The big tall red buildings kind of thing. We need to be careful that we're not building projects that end up creating more segregation that Joe was describing. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we were going to do the rapid fire round, but since we are somehow ahead of the predicted schedule, and since Mayor Rennie voiced some dislike for simple yes, no questions, and as YIMBYs, I think we appreciate nuance. If you can keep answers to like a sentence or two, you're welcome to say yes or no and explain your answer a little bit for this next set of questions. And so for this round of very short answer questions, we'll have Rob go first, then Gail, then Joe. So the first question, would you defend the state's role in setting minimum standards for land use and zoning? Rob.
Yes.
Gail?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Joe?
Yes, not only do we need to expand like state control, but we really need to fight for local, making sure we have the most affordable housing policies for everyone.
Great. Okay. Would you support legislation that makes it easier to create middle density housing like 4-plexes or 8-plexes? Rob?
Yes, but we're referring to SB 9, which has some issues with it. So I would look for some more opportunities to do that.
Yes.
Joe?
Yes, we need more of all housing for all people.
Okay, AB 1482 in 2019 limited the ability of landlords to drastically raise rents on tenants as well as provided just cause eviction protections. Would you have voted for this bill if you were in the assembly at the time? Rob.
That one I'm not familiar with. I'm probably not sure, actually. I'm going to go with not sure.
Okay, Gail
100% yes.
and Joe.
Yes, and I further support rent control. We really need to be protecting our tenants and fighting for that.
Thank you. Assembly member Alex Lee recently introduced AB 2053, the Social Housing Act, which would create the California Housing Authority and authorize it to build publicly owned, union-built, financially sustainable, affordable housing. Do you support the concept of California building social housing?
Yes, but being careful we don't create projects, as I described earlier.
I support the legislation, yes.
Yes, and I hope to model myself after Alex Lee and his nuanced ideas.
Thank you. As it stands right now, people who bought their houses recently pay far more in taxes than people who bought their homes before 1978, thanks to Proposition 13. Do you think Prop 13 needs to be reformed?
Yes, it went way beyond protecting old people from, or seniors from being priced out of their homes or taxed out of their homes.
And I support this 100%. And I would also want to look at the corporate tax laws as well.
I also support this, and in 2020, there's actually a proposition on the ballot to really fix some of these issues, and unfortunately it failed, but I hope to address them as the next state assembly member.
Thank you. Okay, recently Assembly member Laura Friedman introduced a bill, AB 2097, to eliminate local parking mandates in areas well served by transit. Do you support ending parking requirements that increase the cost of housing and encourage driving?
Generally, yes. There could be some issues, one size fits all on that, but yes.
Yeah, I like the idea, yes.
Yes, and I've supported this in Santa Cruz. We're actually working on ending a lot of parking minimums in the city.
Building infill housing is in already developed areas is better for the environment than building housing on greenfield land. Should all code compliant infill housing be categorically exempt from CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act?
Consistent with what I said earlier, I want to make sure CEQA doesn't block housing, but we still allow some discussion with some limited time frame on it.
I support some flexibility in CEQA, but our environment does need to be protected. So we need to be looking at that and water supply issues.
Yes, I also support this. Specifically, we need to look into investing more in brownfield redevelopment that can help kind of fix these environmental issues as well.
Would you support legislation to require cities to allow higher density housing near public transportation and jobs in order to reduce urban sprawl and car dependency?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely again.
Okay, and last question. We support everyone who gets more housing built, but please feel free to pander to our audience. Are you a YIMBY?
Yes.
Count me in as a YIMBY.
Yep, we got to fight those NIMBYs.
Okay, thank you. So each candidate now has 1 minute for concluding remarks, starting with Rob, then Joe, and then Gail.
I would just remind everyone that I'm a problem solver. Affordable housing and missing middle housing are top on my list of things to address in Sacramento. I have a lot of ideas on how to do that. I shared some of them here, but I have a lot more that, and again, I think my focus would be particularly on adding some more sweeteners instead of more what I think of stick bills. We need some of those too, but adding to the sweeteners also on that. So please vote for me. And I would also add that I think it was mentioned in the opening statements about endorsements. I have endorsements from some YIMBY, also with Dave Cortese and Jim Bell and Ro Khanna and so forth. Thanks.
Joe?
And thank you guys so much for holding this forum. It really means a lot, especially as someone who has faced housing insecurity issues personally. And, when it comes down to it, we have a lot of great candidates here. I can't, knock them on that. But it really comes down to it. Who's going to be the one who's putting up the biggest fight in Sacramento? And really, when it comes down to it, our generation has nothing to lose. Again, 9% of students at UC Santa Cruz are homeless. And to me, that is a crisis. We have a huge crisis that isn't being addressed. And the way to fix that is having someone who's not only going to be voting always, along the lines of EMB, but who's going to actively be reaching out to EMB and working with you guys to not only work on these housing projects, but to make sure that we fight for equitable housing for all people. Again, I support reparations, rent control, not only the empty home tax, but a lot of other progressive housing policies that really take, this to the next level to address this housing crisis. Thank you again.
Okay.
So I'm honored to be endorsed by several members of the state legislature, including State Senator John Laird, Assembly members Mark Stone and Robert Rivas, and Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon. I've also earned the endorsements of CTA, labor groups, and Equality California. I've dedicated my career to public service, and I will never lose sight of the fact that I work for you. I will represent you with passion, commitment, dedication, and persistence to ensure that the needs of our district are met. Those who know me understand that I will work hard for you. I will go above and beyond to meet the needs of my constituents in the 28th Assembly District, especially the working families and the unhoused and people seeking housing. I will take my experience and tenacity to Sacramento, and I will continue to be a problem solver and a coalition builder. I believe in the whatever it takes philosophy when serving the public. In closing, I was the caretaker of your voting rights and the person who was there for people when government shut down. And I will take that same fire, creativity, and dedication to be the caretaker of your rights for representation in Sacramento. So thank you for putting on this forum tonight. I appreciate it. I learned a lot, and I hope that you have a better sense of who I am and how I will serve you as your state assembly member. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, candidates. Thank you, audience. On behalf of Santa Cruz EMB, South Bay EMB, and the Student Housing Coalition, I really appreciate everybody's time. Ryan just added some information, links to websites for all three candidates in the chat. So if you'd like to learn more about their positions on other issues, please visit their websites. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you. And thank you to all of my colleagues for all their good ideas also. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.